helping people make informed decisions that lead to living a life without regret. This is Sarah Kaki and Shawna Woods from Atlanta Divorce Law Group, and this is the Happily Ever After Divorce podcast. All right, today we are going to discuss a topic that feels very intimate to both Shawna and I. We are going to discuss being children of parents who are struggling with a mental health condition. We also have with us our very own AJ Askew. AJ is with us here at Atlanta Divorce Law Group, but she also carries a Master's of Education in Childhood Trauma. So we couldn't have asked for a better person to partner up with us in this conversation. Shawna and I aren't really coming at this from a psychology perspective or even of a Master's in Education in Childhood Trauma perspective, but more of children who did have parents who had mental illness challenges as we were growing up. Shawna, why don't you go tell us a little bit about just an overview of however much you want to share about what you grew up with. You share yours, I'll share mine.
Yeah, we definitely don't have a master's and we've not been trained in it, but it does feel like I have an education in the experience that I have had. My mom suffers from a bipolar disorder, but back when I was a child, we didn't know, and nobody knew really what bipolar was at that point in time. And kind of jokingly now look back at it, we just thought mom was crazy. There was so many mood swings, there were so many personalities that she had, and everything that she experienced, and as an adult looking back on it, I can look at it from her perspective, but experiencing as a child was so much different, and it really informed my entire childhood and much into my young adulthood as well, and kind of developed into who I am as a person. And a lot of people, if they don't know what a bipolar disorder can do, is the mood swings are vast. The depressions can be super deep. And her depressions in particular would last weeks at a time. And she would just be laying in bed for days. And then, that of course turned into, if I didn't want to go to school, I didn't have to because nobody was there to make me. My father at the time worked night shifts. So it was really kind of a feral childhood when mom was in her depression, which can lead to a lot of different, neglect issues. And then mom's highs, her manics, there was two types. Mom's manics could either be super fun as a child, not real stable. There would be days when, mom would wake up and be like, all right, we're driving across country today. Or there would be nights where she'd wake up at midnight and say, let's go play tennis. That was really fun for a 10, 11-year-old, but again, didn't really provide for a whole lot of stability if you're going to school or anything else. And then her manics could also be very violent, very angry, and just kind of out of control. And so this occurred, without any, what we thought reason. We had no idea what was going on with mom. Doctors diagnosed her with everything from hypoglycemia, right? So it was really funny is because she would start to get mad and we'd think her blood sugar was low. So we'd try to give her a glass of milk and that would make her even madder. And it was just, I remember those things as like trying to slide that milk over.
This is how unfamiliar people were with mental health conditions.
They were so unfamiliar with it. So when mom was actually properly diagnosed, it was actually shortly after the birth of my younger brother. So at that time, I was already 15. And she was put into a facility. Back up a little bit, at the age of 12 was the first time that I had the experience of talking my mother out of suicide. Mm. And really took on that role of it's my responsibility to make sure that my mom does not commit suicide. And that continued many years as she would come in dips and lows throughout the years. But when I was 15, after she gave birth to my younger brother, she had to be put into a hospital for mental health issues. And I took care of my brother. That was kind of my job. And so when she came out, she was on her medication, and we saw this completely different person. It was really amazing. It was a stable individual. It was a person that you could rely on. It was a person you could trust. And it was really so amazing to see her bloom and blossom, when she was properly medicated. And for a while, she would come on and off the medication because she would think, oh, I'm better.
Yeah.
And get
That's
off.
the tricky thing with bipolar disorder.
It is. It is really hard. They think they're better. And so there was some time where it was a stabling. There was a good, I would say, chunk of 10 years where my mom was stable. And I was really grateful for that 10-year period of time, because in that 10-year period of time, I, at the age of 18, as you know, had my daughter. And because my mom was stable, she was a really good grandma in that 10 years to my daughter.
Yeah.
And I loved the fact that my daughter got to experience this wonderful grandmother where I didn't get to experience this wonderful mom. But it's all that diagnosing it the right way and getting the right help. And I do count so many things that are positives coming out of my childhood that, handling mom. And one is the ability to read people very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you walk into a room and you don't know which personality you're getting from your parent, you look for those clues immediately.
It's a survival skill.
It is a survival skill. And, looking at all the things that we, form ourselves, one of the things that I really try to do is look for that positive point. What did it give me that I can use now? It helps me with our clients.
Yeah.
It helps me relate to our clients. It helps me understand a lot of where they're coming from. And it really does give me that really kind of quick read of the room.
Right.
What's this feeling that's going on in here? So I do think that, overall, as much as, it was a negative impact of me as a child, you have to turn and learn from everything that's happened to you and use it to become your own person.
Yeah, I think our common theme always comes from one of my greatest mentors, which is your most painful moment can become your most powerful moment. And that was very much my experience as well. I wasn't as young as you. First time I saw any signs of depression in my dad was in 8th grade. And just to give a little bit background, I thought of my dad as a combination of Robin Williams and Arnold Schwarzenegger. Like the funniest, goofiest, sweetest man you'll ever meet that can play Barbies with you and be so silly with you, but also like the strongest man who, if anything's like going to hurt you, he would put his life in front of it. So absolute pedestal. And, he moved us from Iran to Sweden as refugees and did it with that kind of an attitude of like, this is going to be fun, kids. Like imagine Robin Williams moving his family across the world. What would his attitude have been? It was just my dad. This is going to be great. We're going to learn how to ski. We're going to love the snow. We're going to learn Swedish, blah, 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 blah. And my mom's like, oh my God. And then he moved us again when we were teenagers in 96 to America. Such a positive attitude. But he was in his midlife point at that point. He was closer to 50 when we moved to America. And I was in 7th grade and he worked so hard to get us a status to stay here. And once he got us the status in 8th grade, he started really reverting backwards. And this is why the Robin Williams story is like a really touching one for me, because I really saw that whole happiest man alive, but the pain going on inside in my dad. And I couldn't understand why he wouldn't come out with us. I couldn't understand why he wouldn't play with us. I couldn't understand why we've moved to this country now with all this opportunity, but he just wanted to stay in bed. So my dad and I had a really close relationship. So in 8th grade once, it's the first thing I heard from him that was just like, what? He said something to me, Sarah, sometimes I just wish I could stop living. I wish I didn't have to live anymore. And I think he thought I was a lot more mature than I was to hear that. And I didn't know what to do with that. And I remember couldn't even continue a dialogue. And I felt so bad that I couldn't be there for him and say anything back. And I just go, okay. And I completely absorbed that as, why am I not enough for you to be here? Right? I was 14 years old. Why was I not enough for you to want to live, for you to have a will to live? So then we have a few more years go by and I'm in high school and I start seeing more signs and more language of, some days I just wish I could like lay my eyes and never wake up again. And, you're 16, 17 years old, you're going through your own turmoil. And I'm hearing him say these things. And again, I'm a rescuer, I'm a fixer. And if, this is my dad and I can't even do anything. Then I go to law school and the depression truly sits to the point he's not getting out of bed. He's having the depression show up in metaphysical ways where he has severe stomach aches. We take him to the doctor. I can't even get him to stay at the doctor's office. He escapes the doctor's office before the doctor comes in. Just terrible. And the physicians are like, there's nothing wrong. We can't find anything wrong with him. And in our culture, I come from a Middle Eastern culture, there is no thing as like mentally, I can't push through this. What do you mean? You're in a free country? You have a job, you go make an income, get up, go to work. What's the problem? So finally we kind of came to terms that this is depression. That's what this is. So my dad refused to go to a therapist. He refused to go see a psychologist or psychiatrist because again, the stigma is very strong in our culture and you will yourself through these things, but he couldn't. And I was in law school at this point, and my mom would come to me and say, the primary care physician gave us this Lexapro. He won't take it. You're the only one he'll listen to. Can you please go get him to take this? And I so empathize with what you said about feeling responsible for your mom, because my mom really made me think my dad may hurt himself, and that the only way he may not hurt himself is if you're convincing enough to go give him the Lexapro. So talk about life skills you develop as a child for taking responsibility for your parents. Man, I became a very convincing, influential human being because I thought that's what it's going to take. Yeah. How influencing can I be? How strong can my language be? How good can I be in convincing another person to do something against their will? And if that's the skill I have to save my dad, that's what's going to take. And thank God, 4 years later, he got out of it through what he needed to do on his own. The Lexapro turned him into a zombie. He couldn't stick to it. He's much, much better now. He's found his expression of his depression through art, through woodwork. So he's really come out of it the other end. But we had a 4-year process when it was very clear that he couldn't get out of bed. He had severe depression. He wasn't coming out. He wasn't seeing people. Even when he asked to see us, it would be like 15 minutes before something got to him and he had to walk away. There's moments even in law school when he would come visit me at my apartment in Athens, the UGA. And I remember studying for, property exam or something. And I'd look over at my dad and I would notice that the man is staring out into space for an hour straight and not doing anything. And I couldn't even understand. So those moments have that mix of pain, intense pain, but such deep power inside of them. And the purpose we're talking about this is not just for Shawna and I to have our own therapy session together here, which is nice, but we were really thinking about parents who are either highly functioning people but are challenged with the mental condition that they are functioning with. And what do they need to know about how their children are processing this? Because I can empathize with my dad and your mom thinking in their head, how am I impacting my children? And then there's the other side of it, which is the other spouse, like my mom, who was co-parenting with my dad while he was ill and wondering how is it going to impact me. That's one of the reasons I'm so excited to have AJ here, because she has studied this and how it can impact children as they turn into adults. So AJ, just based on what you've heard Shawna and I discuss, how would you translate sort of what we took from those moments and what you've kind of studied and seen, and you're just your own personal opinion about it?
So I think when we talk about resiliency, we like think of it as kind of like just a word that we say, like we just say like, oh, resiliency, but resiliency is like a concept when we're talking about childhood trauma. So I think you both, by finding some sort of positive out of these survival skills that you guys had to learn, like Shawna, when you're talking about your hypervigilance of like what's going on around you, that's like very much a result of having to, like, as a child, be hyper aware of like, am I going to do something that's going to make this other person mad at me? And then I'm going to have to face a consequence for that. So I don't want to do that. So I'm just going to like very closely watch their mood, their facial expressions, their tone. I'm going to like be hyper aware of everything that's happening around me because I'm not going to like make the wrong move with this person. You're talking about how now you have translated that into like a skill with people where you walk into a room and you figure out what's what. And Sara, you saying like, I had to learn how to get my dad to do this and I was the only one he would listen to. And you've now turned it into, I can be compelling for people. I can be influential to people. So those are like, that's what resiliency is when we're talking about like how we instill resiliency in kids, is like, that's how we like make them change or like have them change their outlook into how can I have a positive outlook about this situation instead.
AJ, how do you think Shawna's mom or my dad could have, if they had the ability to, because that's the big if. It's a big if they had the mental capacity to do this for us when we were children, to help us better understand. Because there was moments that I was empathetic to my dad and wanted to love on him and take care of him, but there were moments I was so angry. Mm-hmm. I was so angry that, when I was about to have my engagement party, there was the thought that he might not even show up to my engagement party. When I was going through some of the craziest moments in law school, he might not be there for me. Shawna, I can't even imagine.
There was
birthdays for you.
Well, I didn't have any.
You didn't have any?
Because my mom, that's part of the mental illness. She was attracted to what I would say was kind of a cult-like religion. There were no holidays in but the anger that I would feel towards her when I was older, when I was younger, I just desperately wanted my mom to be there. And then even if she was angry or, when she was just in these kind of wild, let's go cross country drives, it was great because I just wanted mom's attention. You're just that little. When I was older, I was horribly angry. I was very, very angry at my mom, that I was even angry that she was bringing another child into this life, because I thought, how dare you? I know what I had to go through and you're doing this to another child. So I think it was one of the reasons I was really close to my younger brother, was I was very protective over him. So there was a lot of anger and there was a lot of sadness, of not having and I still kind of feel some of that sadness of not having a maternal figure, and not having a mom, because feeling always like you were the mom.
Yeah.
I think anger is like one of the emotions we get when we don't understand the other things. It's like an easier, less complex emotion than what's actually going on. And Sara, something that you said is how like culturally just like mental health was looked at. So one of the best things you can do for your kids is give them a vocabulary, like give them like, this is what's going on. Like I have bipolar disorder. So sometimes when I do this, I'm having a bipolar episode and I'm not mad at you. Mm-hmm. I'm having something happening with me. Because as kids, you see that and you say, what am I doing wrong to cause this? Why doesn't this person love me? And
why am I not enough?
Yeah. Because you have what you're working with at the time as a small child, which is like a very basic understanding of human behavior and why people do things. It's like, well, sometimes when I don't like someone, I do this. So if they're doing this to me, they don't like me. And that's your parent and you're very confused. But if you have the vocabulary of, my mom is having a bipolar episode, this is what's going on. And you can like have a name for the experience that's happening to you, it makes a big difference. And then also giving kids the vocabulary to define their own feelings. Like when you're saying, I was angry, like Shawna, it sounds to me also like you were grieving not having a mom. So you were angry, but you were also grieving, like you were processing like a grief of something that you didn't get to have access to. And Sarah, when you're talking about your dad, it sounds like culturally when he was a kid, he wasn't told like, this is what mental health is. So when he was experiencing it as an adult man, he still didn't have like the vocabulary to put a name to what he was experiencing. So that's like how these cycles keep on happening, is people can, like, as children experience these traumas, and then as adults continue to not be able to like name what's happening to them and continue to like misrepresent themselves and their feelings to the people around them. And unfortunately, it's their kids sometimes.
You know, Sarah, that's so interesting, because we were just talking about words and how powerful they were last podcast, and actually naming things what they are and saying what they are, and giving voice to them and saying, this is what it is. And I love the way that AJ just brought that up, because it's just so powerful.
So at what point does it become oversharing? Because I am grateful today, after, you know, all the personal development I've done on myself and having, you know, achieved things in life, that I get to enjoy the life I have for every piece of what happened. Even the part where my dad looked me, you know, his 14-year-old daughter in the eyes and said, I just wish I could, you know, go to sleep and never wake up again. But if I was to be objective about it, to me, it felt like now I'm like, that's oversharing. So can you give us a little bit of like, what do you think that line is with giving the powerful words to bring an understanding to this, like you and Shawna are saying, versus the parent oversharing? Because I do think, especially with bipolar disorder, we see this in a lot of our clients, there's a bit of oversharing from the parent with the child.
No, I think that's like an extremely valid question, because I think it's a hard thing to like because so many people feel that way about their kids. Like, this is happening, but I don't want the kids to know about it. Yeah. But like, I don't want them to like hear us arguing or hear us talking about this. So to some extent, if something is happening in your life, it's just happening also to your kids. So to keep aspects of that away from them, you can cause like more confusion because it's already happening to them. It's already impacting them. It's already affecting them, whether you acknowledge it or not. Kids pick up on a lot of stuff that's happening to them. But we're talking about oversharing. I think that's when people have to use their own vocabularies and like have their own boundaries and teach their kids about boundaries and teach them about what is and is not okay to like put on someone else. And I think if everyone had a better understanding of this is trauma dumping and this is sharing. Like this is not, I'm not going to trauma dump on you. I'm not going to tell you all of my problems, all of these things, like what are you going to do about it? Especially for people that are fixers. Like you said, their instinct is, if you tell me about this thing, how do I fix it? So there's a difference between trauma dumping and like genuinely being transparent about what's going on. So the difference between sometimes I don't want to be alive anymore and this saying like, sometimes I have this disorder and sometimes I get moods where I feel this way, but like, here's what I'm doing about it. And it's like, here's the way, like, here's why I am happy to like be alive, or here's what I did like about today. Like just making sure there's not any like unsolvable problems that your child is going to feel responsible for solving for you.
And that's exactly it for both Shawna and I. I think we had a sense of responsibility for the parent. And we felt like their survival was tied to us.
Absolutely. I love that term, trauma dumping.
Yes.
I was very drawn to it, and you had said, it reminds me of something else that we have talked about is trauma bonding. If you don't process the things that happen through your childhood, you can go from relationship to relationship because you trauma bond with someone and you have this feeling of intense closeness and intense love when it's not really what it is a shared experience. Right. And so I do think that leads to, potential divorces as well.
Yes.
Is if you don't heal from this, if you don't clean your own plate,
right,
you could be taking this on into another relationship as well.
And AJ, so much of what I hear you say is depend on what the parent can do, the parent who is battling this mental condition, what they can do. And some of them honestly might not be battling. Some might really have it under control with therapy or medication or just some sort of self-awareness that they've gained over it. But what about the parent that isn't there, right? The parent who either, like mine, did not even acknowledge the diagnosis, didn't even want to name it, right? Or like Shawna's, who during the years that your mom was having some serious ups and downs of bipolar disorder, there was not any awareness to even be able to have this conversation with you. So what can the other adults in this child's life do? What could have, my mom listens to this, she's going to kill me. What could have my mom have done better? Because I want to bring up the specific instance of coming to your child and saying, you're the only one he'll listen to. You go push the Lexapro on him.
Right.
Now I'm a drug pusher.
I mean, I think especially in like really close-knit families that are so used to just going to each other for everything that can happen, where you're like, well, there's this responsibility and someone's got to do it. So who is going to be responsible for this thing? And it's like really unfortunate when parents try to like make that feel like it's their child's responsibility. But in terms of what parents can do because mental health just happens. It's not like it's 100% preventable for anyone. So unfortunately, children are going to have parents that are struggling with mental health, and there's no way around it. So for the kids to foster resiliency, there's like steps we can take to make sure that kid's like gonna turn out like okay after the experience is over. And it sounds like for the most part, you two had to by yourselves figure out, how am I going to survive this? It was very, I'm alone in this situation. What am I going to do about getting out of it? But support systems are great. So not even like just your parents, like encouraging your child to have a support system of their own friends at school, getting your child in therapy themselves. Even if you're thinking like, well, my child's not depressed, they don't need to do this. If they're processing your trauma with you, maybe your child does need to go see a therapist, and maybe that therapist is more qualified to give them the words to name all their emotions and everything they're going more than you can. Mm-hmm. And also something that I really latched onto when I was working on this was the importance of giving kids like islands of competence. It's like the idea of, if your kid is like lost at sea, I can control nothing about what's going on. My parents are getting a divorce. My mom's depressed. We're transferring schools. I have to move. There's all these things happening that this kid cannot solve, can do nothing about. Is giving that kid like an island in that ocean of things that they don't understand. And it's called like as a concept, an island of competence. And it's just giving them one thing where like, I'm good at this. So it's like it sounds abstract, but it's like putting your kid in soccer and having them be really good at soccer, or like letting them go compete in a state science fair, like letting them feel like there's this area of my life that I'm really good at. And like giving them a positive thing to focus on when everything else seems like it's just not going to work out at all, I think can make a really big difference. And they can attach that to like a sense of identity that's being like shaped in other areas of their life. Wow.
She just unraveled for me what my ultimate gift was. Because this is my period where I was getting absolute straight A's and overachieving in school. And that's what my mom did for me very much during that time. She just kept pushing school to me. And whenever I was getting, too distracted with what's going on, she just, law school's coming up. Get the grades. And then when I was in law school, she just kept putting that in front of me. Shawna, did you have a similar experience where you just latched onto something?
Later in my experience, I was older when I went to college, because I did have my daughter very young. But it was the same kind of thing as and it wasn't being pushed on me. It was more of me knowing that for me and now my daughter, I needed to create competency. Right. And I was very much into school and making sure I had the highest A in the course, and making sure that I was going to be okay so that my daughter was going to be okay. So, for me, there was something, I heard some other things in there, but it was when you were talking about having other people be for them there as well. And my saving grace when I was very young was that I had aunties who were very much as they could, be involved in my life and really kind of try to develop for me an interest. I had one who would bake me a sweet potato pie if I would write her poetry.
Wow.
And now that I look back at that and I'm hearing AJ talk, I'm like, what a gift that was. Like, she reached in and saw something and said, let me work with you. I'm going to do what I can.
Yeah, I think they're called, like, in academia, resiliency factors. Like, how many resiliency factors do you have going for you in your life? And having a support system, having an island of competence, having all these other things, like, that's the difference maker of when we're talking about in terms of life outcomes, like, how did I turn out versus how could I have turned out? Like, those are the factors we're looking at that legitimately did make all the difference. It wasn't just like, my aunt did me this really nice thing for me when I was 5. It's like, that's a lifelong difference that she made by being involved in your life.
So this is a loaded question, and I don't think we can do our best and take a stab at it. Do we think that resilience comes from nature or nurture?
I, as a sociology major, will always say nurture.
I'm sure you're committed to that. And I pray to God that's the case, because that would then really sit with my value system of these obstacles, these challenges are a true gift. My heart gets broken when I see people that these obstacles, it breaks them.
Yeah. And
perhaps if they had more of the tools, more of the education, not necessarily school education, but just the vocabulary, like AJ's saying, they could, get past it and thrive from it, not just survive it, but thrive. As I truly believe I did, and I believe you did too. Mm-hmm. We took something and made something even more amazing out of it. And thankfully we're in a privileged position. We can help people with our stories. AJ, you were talking offline with Shawna about ACEs. Mm-hmm. So that just like blew my mind before we even got started. So can you go over that a little bit about how this actually can then manifest itself in physical form for the child that experienced this trauma?
Yeah, so ACEs are childhood adverse childhood experiences. And it was a concept developed during like social research, like of development of people later in life. I think it was a public health study at first where people were trying to figure out, why is this group of people experiencing higher rates of physical ailments like diabetes, heart attack, high cholesterol, younger ages of death, all those things. And they were studying just a life history of these people and found common themes that happened to them in childhood, which they later called adverse childhood experiences, which are things like, there's like a set list. I think there's 8 of them. But having your dad be incarcerated, having your mother be physically abused, experiencing abuse or neglect yourself as a child, having your parent experience mental health, experiencing poverty as a young person, having your parents get divorced is an ACE. I can't remember the other ones, and they're linked to, depending on like how many of them you have, there's a linkage of higher rates of things later in life, like high cholesterol, or heart attacks, or depression, or being incarcerated, or all these things.
That's so fascinating. Well, AJ, thank you so much for that. Shawna, thank you for spilling your guts with me. Thanks for listening to the Happily Ever After Divorce podcast. If you'd like to learn more, go to atlantadivorcelawgroup.com/resources.